best place to begin is to take a walk around the camera itself and get familiar with the functions of the external buttons, switches, and other controls. Then we'll take a closer look at most of them during later chapters of the DVD. I suggest that you get your own camera out and follow along. At times, you may want to pause the video to experiment with the settings and try things out for yourself. So, let's start with the power switch. To turn the camera on, I rotate the switch to the on position, and the camera will be ready to shoot before I can even put my eye to the viewfinder. Located in the center of the power switch is the shutter release button. Pressing it halfway down will activate the autofocus and auto exposure functions so that the camera can start making its calculations for taking the best picture. To get good results, you need to press the shutter button halfway down, hold it there for a beat or two while the camera determines the best settings, and then press the shutter button the rest of the way to actually take the photo. Arguably, the most important control on the Nikon D5000 is the exposure mode dial. The mode dial has 13 different settings, and each one of them will change how the camera takes your pictures. So choosing the most appropriate exposure mode will make a big difference in how your pictures turn out. Now, the exposure modes range in complexity from fully automatic, where the camera controls everything, all the way to fully manual, where you have to do all of the work yourself. In fact, they can be divided up into two groups: the advanced modes and the point-and-shoot modes. I'll be talking a lot about the differences between these two groups of exposure modes throughout this DVD, as I try to convince you not to use the point-and-shoot modes if you really want to take great photos with the D5000. Next, there's the exposure compensation button that can be used to override the camera's automatic exposure settings. We'll talk more about that later too. Next to that, there's the info button. Now, when you press this button, you can turn on or off the shooting information display that is shown on the LCD screen at the rear of the camera. Now, moving around to the front of the camera, we find the lens release button. One of the great things about having an SLR is the ability to change lenses to suit different shooting situations. To remove a lens from the camera, make sure the camera is turned off. Then press down on the release button and turn the lens clockwise and take it off. Now, to mount a lens on the camera, again, make sure the power is turned off. Align the index marks, slide the lens firmly into place, and rotate it counterclockwise until you hear it lock into place. One thing to be aware of is that some older Nikon lenses are not fully compatible with the D5000. What you want to look for is the designation AFS in the model number of the lens. If a lens doesn't say AFS on it, then chances are the autofocus and/or auto exposure functions of the D5000 won't work properly. Just above the lens release button is a special programmable function button. By default, the function button is programmed to activate the self-timer mode, and that's probably the best setting to leave it on. To take a picture with the timer, you press the function button once, and then press the shutter button. Now the camera will beep, and the light will flash while it counts down. And then it will take the picture. Now, if you want to take another picture using the timer, you have to press the function button again, because the camera does not stay in the timer mode. The final button on the front of the camera is the flash mode button. Pressing this button will release the built-in flash and activate it for shooting. And when you're done, you can just press it back down until it locks into place. I should point out that the flash mode button only works when you're shooting with one of the advanced exposure modes. If you're shooting with one of the point-and-shoot exposure modes, pressing the button won't do anything at all, because the camera will decide all on its own when to use the flash, and you can't override its decision. If you want additional flash power and more creative flexibility, you can attach an optional external flash to the hot shoe located right here. On the left side of the camera, underneath this cover, you'll find 3 jacks that are used to connect the camera to other equipment. The first jack is called the accessory terminal. This can be used for attaching an optional remote shutter release cable, or you can use it with Nikon's optional GPS receiver to record the latitude, longitude, and altitude of every picture you shoot. The next jack has 2 purposes. First, it functions as a standard USB connector for connecting the camera to a computer, or even directly to a printer. And second, you can use the supplied AV cable to connect your D5000 to a television monitor. That way you can view your pictures on a TV instead of the tiny LCD screen. However, if you have a high-definition TV, let me strongly suggest that you use the HDMI port right here instead. The HDMI port allows you to view your photos on a high-definition monitor with dramatically better picture quality. Now, moving around to the rear of the camera, we find the greatest number of dials, buttons, switches, and other controls. The most dominant feature is the excellent 2.7-inch vari-angle LCD monitor. Unlike any other Nikon camera before it, the D5000's LCD monitor can be swung out and then rotated, twisted, and turned so that you can use it at just about any angle. You can even stow the monitor like this to protect the screen when the camera isn't being used. Just above the LCD is the excellent optical viewfinder. It's bright, clear, and a pleasure to use. There's a lot of information shown in the viewfinder, including the focus points, the in-focus indicator light, the shutter speed, the aperture, and the remaining capacity of the memory card. Other information might also be displayed depending on your camera's current settings. The focus of the viewfinder eyepiece should be adjusted to suit your own eyesight by sliding the diopter adjustment control up or down until the icons at the bottom of the screen appear sharp. Next to the diopter adjustment control is the auto exposure lock, auto focus lock button, which also doubles as the protect button as well. We'll see how it's used later. The command dial is used to change the shutter speed, aperture, and many other camera settings. Sometimes it's used all by itself, and sometimes it's turned while you hold down another button on the camera. We'll be using the command dial frequently during the rest of this video. Next is the Live View button. Live View enables you to display a real-time video image on the LCD monitor instead of using the optical viewfinder to take your pictures. In fact, you can even use the Live View mode to record high-definition video. To turn Live View on, you just press the button and it's ready to go. But note that now the regular viewfinder is blacked out and can't be used at all while the Live View is turned on. So to take a picture, you just press the shutter button. However, with the Live View, as you'll see, there will usually be a noticeable delay before the picture is actually taken. In this mode, the camera needs extra time to focus and adjust the exposure before the shutter snaps. And that's one of the big disadvantages with using Live View. To get out of the Live View mode, you simply press the Live View button again. The OK button is pretty self-explanatory. Anytime you want to make a selection from the menu screens, you just press the OK button. It's also used as the Record Start Stop button whenever you're shooting movies. Surrounding the OK button is the multi-selector control, which functions kind of like a joystick for navigating through the menus and viewing the images that are stored on the memory card. I'll usually refer to the multi-selector during the rest of the DVD as the 4 arrow buttons. Now let's jump over to the other side of the camera and take a look at the delete button. Sometimes you'll know right away that a photo you just took is no good. So why not just get rid of it right away? Well, you can do that with the delete button. You just press the delete button once and a confirmation screen will appear. Press the delete button again to confirm the deletion and the picture is gone. So do be careful. Running down the left side of the LCD monitor, there are 5 additional buttons. There's the playback button, the menu button, the thumbnail button, which also doubles as the help button, the playback zoom in button, and the information edit button. I'll always refer to this button as the I button. During the playback chapter of this DVD, we'll take a detailed look at how the playback, thumbnail, and playback zoom-in buttons are used. So let's skip them for now. Also, we'll be taking an in-depth look at the camera's menu system in the next chapter. So let's skip the menu button too. So that leaves the I button as the only one on the rear of the camera left to talk about. But first, let's take a look at the shooting information display screen. The shooting information display screen is where you can see all of the camera's most important settings while you're shooting. Learning to understand what all this information means and then how to change the camera settings shown on the display will be very important to your success as a photographer. At the top of the screen, you can see the exposure mode that has been selected with the mode dial. Here we see the exposure mode is currently set for M, which means manual. Next, there's a graphical representation of the current shutter speed and the aperture. Watch the graphic change as I adjust the shutter speed or change the aperture. Now, if you're an experienced photographer, these graphical images might not be of much use. But if you're new to photography, then they might help you visualize what the camera is doing as you adjust the controls. However, whether you're experienced or not, the more precise method of monitoring your exposure settings is by watching these numbers next to the animated graphic. Here you'll see the exact shutter speed and the exact aperture. At the top of the screen, this musical note means that the camera will beep when it finishes autofocusing and whenever the self-timer is counting down. A little later, we'll see how you can turn that off if you want to keep the camera quiet. Next, there's an icon to let you know approximately how much of your battery's capacity is left. Nikon says you should be able to take about 500 photos with a fully charged battery, but that number will vary quite a bit depending on what functions you're using. For example, live view and the movie mode will use up the batteries a lot faster than will normal picture taking. One of the first accessories you should buy for the D5000 is a spare battery. This part of the display shows us the image quality setting, and this one the image size. Next, there's the white balance mode, the ISO setting, the release mode, the focus mode, the autofocus area mode, the metering mode, the active delighting mode, the bracketing mode, the remaining capacity of the memory card, the picture control setting, flash compensation, exposure compensation, the flash mode, and the active autofocus point. As you can see, nearly every important camera setting is conveniently displayed right here on one easy-to-understand screen. But that's not the best part. To change almost any setting that is shown, you can press the I button once to enter the information edit mode. Now you can use the multi-selector to highlight the setting you want to change, press the OK button, choose a different setting, press the OK button again to lock it in, and then press the I button to finish. Now, compared to having to drill down into the menus whenever you want to make a change, as with most other cameras, the information edit mode is a huge time saver. Before we move on, let's talk about this setting for a moment, the release mode. The release mode controls what the camera does when you press the shutter button. Most of the time, you'll want the camera to take just one picture at a time. But sometimes you'll want it to fire off several pictures in a row while you hold the shutter button down. Or maybe you'll want to use the self-timer so you can run over and get into the picture yourself. There are 6 release mode choices. Single frame is the mode you'll use most often. The camera takes one photo each time the shutter release button is pressed. In continuous mode, the camera will take up to 4 pictures per second for as long as you hold down the shutter button or until the buffer is full, whichever comes first. Self-timer delays taking the picture by 10 seconds after you press the shutter button. The delayed remote and quick response remote settings both require the use of an optional remote control so that you can release the shutter without even touching the camera. The final mode is called quiet shutter release. This is similar to the single frame mode, except that the camera is slightly quieter and doesn't make any beeping sounds when it focuses, thus keeping noise to a minimum for quiet surroundings. But like I said, single frame is the shooting mode you'll use 99% of the time, so let's leave it set on that. On the right side of the camera, you'll find the slot for the memory card. The door is opened just by sliding it back, and pressing on the card briefly will eject it. Now the D5000 uses ordinary secure digital memory cards for storage. Each card should be formatted before it's used for the first time, and then again later on whenever you want to completely erase all the images and start shooting with a clean slate. Please note that formatting a memory card will effectively erase all data on the card, including any photos that have been protected. Now, formatting a card is very easy to do and takes just a couple of seconds. Here's how. Press the menu button. Use the multi-selector to navigate to the Setup menu tab. Highlight Format Memory Card. Press the OK button. Highlight Yes, and press OK again. That's it. When the formatting is done, the LCD will return to the Setup menu and you're ready to start shooting. Well, that's about it for our walk around the camera. You should now have a better understanding of the external controls of the D5000. Now, I know this chapter wasn't too exciting, but it's very important to have this basic foundation as we continue through the rest of the DVD.